America hires a strongman. That was the New York Times' grim verdict the morning after Donald Trump's re-election. A warning, a prophecy. And now, March 2025, reality. But Trump isn't just ruling with an iron fist, he's following a script, Putin's script. And he's playing his role perfectly. No resistance, no questions, no hesitation. From gutting NATO to abandoning Ukraine, from echoing Kremlin propaganda to undermining America's own alliances, Trump isn't just letting Putin win, he's helping him do it. No one expected him to fall in line this fast or this hard. Here's how it happened and why America should be very, very worried. At first, there was hope. However misplaced, however naive, some believed Trump's second term wouldn't be as pro-Russian as feared. After all, his first term wasn't exactly a gift to the Kremlin. Yes, Trump loved to praise Putin. Yes, Russia had literally toasted his 2016 victory with champagne in their parliament, expecting a golden age of US-Russia relations. But then, reality hit. Trump didn't lift major sanctions. He even imposed new ones. He approved selling Javelin missiles to Ukraine, missiles that would later become legendary for stopping Russian tanks. And while Trump himself might have been sympathetic to Putin, his more hawkish officials often overruled him. By 2020, Moscow had learned its lesson. Trump talked like a Russian ally, but he didn't act like one. So how did we get from that to Trump being called Putin's most useful idiot by General Sir Richard Shirreff, NATO's former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe? Well, things are different this time. Much different. For one, Trump isn't just playing nice with Putin. He genuinely believes that backing Ukraine is a waste of American money. Over $69 billion in military aid down the drain. The only time he gave Ukraine the time of day was when he tried to get President Volodymyr Zelensky to sign away 50% of the country's mineral deposits that could be worth up to $26 trillion. Also, Trump thinks NATO allies are freeloaders. In 2014, only 3 NATO countries achieved the target of investing at least 2% of GDP in defense. In 2024, the situation was much better with 23 countries, but this number still doesn't include all NATO allies. That's why Trump believes America should stop footing the bill and let Europe handle its own problems. As simple as that. And then there's the personal factor. As analyst Ian Bremmer put it, Trump gets along with Putin personally, while Trump believes, correctly, that most European leaders neither like him nor respect him. That's a dangerous mix. Trump's foreign policy has always been driven by ego, and right now, his ego is telling him to side with the one leader who flatters him and turn his back on the allies who don't. And boy, did Putin get the memo. The flattery campaign started early, subtle at first, a little praise here, a calculated gesture there, then it escalated. Putin went on Russian state TV calling Trump a clever and pragmatic man, because nothing feeds Trump's ego like being called smart. He agreed with Trump that the war in Ukraine never would have happened if he'd been in office. He even parroted Trump's own delusions about the 2020 election, saying the crisis could have been avoided if they hadn't stolen the victory from him. And Trump, he ate it all up. But Putin didn't stop there. The Kremlin orchestrated the release of multiple American prisoners, including Mark Fogel, the American schoolteacher arrested in Russia back in 2021, as well as others held in Belarus, all while making it seem like Trump had something to do with it. Make Trump feel like the center of attention, make him believe he's the one calling the shots. Classic KGB playbook. Then came the ultimate stroke of flattery. Putin quoted Trump's own campaign slogan, "Common sense," to justify his approach to Ukraine. Trump instantly bragged about it. Putin's using my words. But that wasn't just flattery, that was bait, and Trump, predictably, lunged for it. Putin, KGB-trained, manipulative, ruthless, is playing Trump like a fool, and Trump, desperate for approval, is letting him. He's even openly celebrating him, making decisions that play directly into Russia's hands. Political scientist Sasha DeVogel called it unthinkable, but here we are. But let's be clear here, Putin doesn't really respect Trump. He doesn't admire him. He sees him for exactly what he is, an easy mark, as John Bolton, Trump's own former national security advisor, puts it. A man whose need for validation is so overwhelming, so predictable, that he can be steered like a puppet. And that's precisely what Hillary Clinton famously called Trump, Putin's puppet. And this was back in 2016. Now, there's nothing stopping Trump from truly becoming one. His first-term advisors, many of whom tried to steer him away from full-on Russian appeasement, are gone. In their place, loyalists who either agree with his pro-Kremlin stance, like Vice President J.D. Vance, or are quietly adapting to it, like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. But judging by Rubio's body language and mortified expression in the Oval Office while Trump and Vance were berating Zelensky, he still has to work on his poker face. Meanwhile, Trump's base has changed too. Pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian sentiment has spread among his supporters, though 62% of them still don't agree with Trump that Zelensky was the one to start the war, according to a Reuters poll. This was just one of the many falsehoods Trump directed at Zelensky, but this one was particularly important. Why? Because it's something that Putin has claimed all along. It's one of his infamous talking points that no one's really buying, except Trump apparently. But this wasn't the only time Trump parroted Putin. He also called Zelensky a dictator without elections, calling into question Ukraine's democracy, another Kremlin classic. Never mind that Zelensky was actually elected with 73% of the votes back in 2019, unlike a certain Russian president who's been in power since the Clinton administration. Never mind that his approval rating is still around 67%, despite a 3-year war. And never mind that Ukraine's elections are on hold because Russia is actively bombing its cities. But Trump didn't stop there. After their disastrous Oval Office meeting, Trump practically launched a smear campaign against the Ukrainian president. He accused Zelensky of being ungrateful for US support, claiming he doesn't even want peace. It takes two to tango, he said, as if Ukraine and Russia were squabbling neighbors, not an invader and a victim. That sound you hear, that's Putin laughing all the way to Kyiv. The Kremlin has spent years trying to delegitimize Zelensky, weaken Ukraine, and fracture Western support. Now they don't even have to lift a finger. Trump's doing the job for them. The US president is delivering everything Putin has ever wanted on a silver platter. Don't believe us? Let's take a look. For decades, Putin has pushed the idea that Ukraine isn't a real country. He called its independence from the Soviet Union a mistake and claimed its borders were drawn unfairly. In his mind, Ukraine is just an extension of Russia, its people, its culture, its land. And he's never stopped trying to erase it from the map. His goal has always been to install a pro-Kremlin government and make Ukraine a vassal state, whether through war, political sabotage, or Western apathy. And now Trump is openly echoing Putin's talking points. He might not go as far as to claim that modern Ukraine was created by Russia, but the sheer fact he's undermining Zelensky's right to lead the country speaks volumes. By letting Putin do whatever he wants, Trump is signaling to Moscow that America won't stop him from forcing regime change. Then there's the issue of territory. Putin always wanted Ukrainian territory, believing he was just taking back what was rightfully his. In 2014, he took Crimea. In 2022, he invaded again, seizing massive parts of Ukraine's east and south. Currently, roughly 18% of Ukraine is under Russian control. That's about 42,000 square miles. Putin's ultimate goal? Hold on to everything he's taken and then grab more when the West stops paying attention. And it looks like the first part is already covered. Trump's team has now openly abandoned the idea that Ukraine should reclaim all of its land. Trump's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is unrealistic. That's music to Putin's ears. Bolton summed it up best. The positions Defense Secretary Hegseth announced in Brussels constitute the terms of a settlement that could have been written in the Kremlin. Maybe they were. The US has effectively told Ukraine, keep what you stole, we won't stop you. Not only that, but we'll make it easier for you to keep stealing. How? By preventing Ukraine from joining NATO. This was always one of Putin's biggest fears, Ukraine becoming a NATO member. After all, a Ukraine in NATO is a Ukraine he can't attack without triggering a full-blown war with the West. That's why he invaded in 2022, or so he claims, citing Ukraine's NATO ambitions as a so-called threat to Russia. If Ukraine is left in limbo, neither in NATO nor fully independent, Putin knows he can keep attacking whenever he wants. And that's exactly what's happening now. Trump's team is shutting the door on Ukraine's NATO hopes. Hegseth didn't just rule out membership, he did so in terms that made it clear Ukraine had no say in the matter. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome, he put it plainly in Brussels. Translation: Putin got exactly what he wanted from the start. And it gets worse. Hegseth also declared that any troops from NATO countries who serve in Ukraine won't be covered by Article 5, the alliance's mutual defense clause. That effectively removes NATO as a deterrent against future Russian attacks. Even Russia's most hardline diplomats couldn't have written a better script. So NATO is off the table for Ukraine. What else? Well, as of recently, so is the US aid. From day one, Putin's strategy has been to wait out the West. He knew Ukraine couldn't survive without US and European military aid, and he bet that if he dragged the war out long enough, the money and weapons would dry up. And on March 4th, the US, Ukraine's single biggest military backer, officially suspended all aid. Not cut, not reduced, stopped. This even includes the $1 billion in aid that had already been approved. This somewhat expected but still shocking move made Shiref conclude that Trump was now very firmly in Putin's camp. He also said that the US could no longer be relied upon or trusted as an ally. It's something that not only Russia is celebrating but China as well. Trump's moves in Ukraine are affecting Taiwan's future in real time. But Trump doesn't care about anyone else besides the US at the moment. America first, remember? This, of course, also includes Europe, which, as things stand, will be left to its own devices. And who's always wanted to separate Europe from the US? You guessed it, Putin. The idea is simple. Without US involvement, Europe will be left weak and vulnerable, divided, and unable to protect itself from Russian aggression. In Putin's mind, Europe doesn't stand a chance without NATO's might and without US leadership. NATO is essentially toothless. After all, the US pays 16% of NATO's running costs, which total roughly $4.1 billion per year. Plus, the country has over 100,000 troops deployed across Europe, the bulk of them being stationed in Germany, Italy, and the UK. But Trump has seemingly had enough of this. He now believes Europe should be the one to protect Europe. It doesn't matter that leaders like Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock have openly admitted that Europe can't do it on its own. It's only a matter of time before a NATO without the US becomes a reality. Then Putin can do whatever he wants. Poland, the Baltic states, the ex-Soviet republics, the continent is his smorgasbord. And do you know who will decide the fate of all these smaller countries? Only the world's superpowers. Putin's ultimate goal has always been to restore Russia's dominance in the world order, harking back to the days when the Soviet Union ruled with an iron fist over the fate of smaller nations. And guess who else seems to be following that playbook? Yep, Trump. This has become obvious in how the Ukrainian peace talks are being handled. Putin wants it simple, just him and Trump at the table, deciding the fate of another country without any interference from weaker nations, Ukraine included. No one else gets a seat at the table, and Ukraine's security is now being haggled over in deals with Russia and Saudi Arabia, with no guarantee that Ukraine will get a say in the peace process. In this way, Ukraine becomes nothing more than a pawn on the table, a bargaining chip for the great powers to decide over. In this new world order, smaller nations will have to take what they're given, even if that's at the expense of their sovereignty. But for Putin's dream of a new world order to materialize, Russia must first be reintegrated into the global system, and that means lifting sanctions and restoring its place on the world stage. Luckily for Putin, Trump seems more than willing to play the role of welcoming host. The US administration has already begun laying the groundwork to ease sanctions on Russian entities and oligarchs. In fact, the State Department and Treasury Department are reportedly compiling lists of Russian figures whose sanctions could soon be lifted. Also, Trump has made it clear that he loves the idea of Russia being welcomed back into the G7, effectively turning it back into the G8. If Trump succeeds, Russia will return to the exclusive club of the world's most powerful nations, signaling a dramatic shift in global dynamics. However, aligning openly with other authoritarian leaders is just one facet of autocratic rule, a path that Trump seems to be accelerating down with each passing day. This certainly isn't the only reason why many worry he could become Putin 2.0. Here are some actions taken by the US president that make us feel like we've seen this story play out before, in Russia. There's no sugarcoating it. Trump's moves are straight out of an authoritarian playbook. The Capitol attack pardons and the appointment of loyalists to key positions, classic strongman tactics like Putin's. His undermining of the rule of law and checks and balances, no accident. His actions are eerily similar to other authoritarian leaders as well, like Viktor Orban in Hungary. As Brendan Nyan of Dartmouth College said, "It's almost embarrassing how crude it is." And he's right. Nyan was just one out of over 800 political scientists who sent a letter to Trump warning him that he was undermining the rule of law and basic constitutional principle of checks and balances. But Trump isn't just centralizing power, he's obliterating the boundaries that have kept US democracy intact. He's purging the Justice Department, placing loyalists atop the FBI and military, and punishing media outlets that don't toe the line. He's testing presidential authority like never before, and the consequences for American democracy are staggering. Just like Putin's Russia, where the executive branch is designed to maintain total control, Trump is dismantling any opposition. Putin centralized power with his 2000 federal district reforms and 2020 constitutional amendments to stay in power until 2026. Like Putin, who manipulates Russia's electoral processes, Trump has waged an attack on election monitors and cyber agencies. Putin doesn't need pesky election overseers, and neither does Trump. By undermining agencies that safeguard elections and combat cyber threats, Trump is paving the way for a system where elections can be rigged and manipulated, just like in Russia. The parallels couldn't be clearer. Trump even hinted at flouting term limits and running for a third term, despite it being explicitly prohibited by the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution. Putin did it in Russia, so why not Trump? After all, he's also methodically undermined democratic institutions, just like his role model. His open disdain for the judiciary might be the most prominent example. He's attacked judges and even suggested changing the court system to serve his interests. Trump's rhetoric against his enemies is also downright chilling. Over 100 threats to prosecute or punish opponents have surfaced during his 2024 campaign. He suggested prosecuting former President Joe Biden, even calling it his mission to go after the Biden crime family. He even hinted at shooting Liz Cheney, a vocal critic of his. These aren't empty threats. They're signs of a leader ready to use state power to settle political scores. Trump's views on human rights are also disturbingly aligned with authoritarian leaders like Putin. While Trump wraps his attacks in the guise of protecting traditional values, his actions signal a blatant disregard for vulnerable groups. Just like Putin, Trump has waged a campaign against transgender rights, framing them as societal threats. He's also seized opportunities to attack what he calls wokeness, echoing Putin's disdain for progressive movements. Trump's attacks on free speech and the media are another disturbing parallel to Putin's tactics. Trump targeted news organizations he saw as hostile, expelling outlets like CNN, The Washington Post, and NPR from Pentagon workspaces and replacing them with far-right publications like Newsmax and Breitbart. It's a classic authoritarian tactic: control the media by limiting access to critical reporters and elevating those who align with the regime's narrative. Trump's strategy mirrors Putin's approach in Russia, where independent media outlets have been shut down or forced into exile. Putin's government has passed laws that criminalize fake news, particularly about the military, leading to the imprisonment of journalists and activists. Similarly, Trump has openly criticized and sought to defund media outlets that challenge him. By expelling established outlets from the Pentagon and replacing them with favorable ones, Trump was creating a media landscape that no longer holds the powerful accountable. The worst part? Trump isn't even trying to hide his true motives. He loves the idea of being seen as a strongman. Just look at his official presidential portrait. Unlike past presidents whose official photographs typically exude openness and optimism, Trump's is deliberately designed to project strength and defiance. Everything about it, the dramatic, metallic lighting from below, the severe squint, the piercing intensity of his gaze, is a calculated break from tradition. Instead of a reassuring presence, this portrait declares dominance, purpose, and a readiness for battle. Art historians have likened Trump's expression to that of a 17th century painting by Salvator Rosa, whose subject stares down the viewer with a look designed to silence dissent, holding an intimidatory sign that reads, "Keep silent unless your speech is better than silence." Similarly, Trump's portrait doesn't invite conversation. It warns against questioning his authority. This image, like his mugshot and the defiant blood-streaked photo from the assassination attempt, cements his identity as a political warrior rather than a conventional leader. Trump has fully embraced the persona of a strongman online too. His rhetoric like, "We are the federal law," and sharing an image of himself crowned with the phrase, "Long live the king," signals his desire to hold all the power, just like Putin. He's positioning himself as a leader above the law. The key questions are, how far will Trump go in his pursuit of absolute authority, and will the American political system survive this challenge to its core principles? Let us know what you think in the comments section below. While you're there, do let us know what you think of this blossoming Putin-Trump alliance. Do you agree with Senator Bernie Sanders, who equates it with abandoning the US allies, supporting authoritarianism, and undermining democratic traditions? We're looking forward to reading all your comments.